Hey, welcome everybody to a little bit of Triumph and Treachery. I'm actually doing this battle as part of Malorian's 12 armies in 12 months kind of campaign. So the goal of this month was to play a battle against some Empire. So out of the 5 armies that are presented here, one of those armies is Empire, so it's going to count. Now, for those of you that haven't done Triumph and Treachery, it's such a cool way to play Warhammer. These little things right here are used to determine random turn order. So they all have a different sort of weapon symbol on one side, and you flip these over. The key thing about it is that when one guy's doing their active turn, they don't know who the next turn's going to be until the next card's flipped over. So that kind of keeps people on their toes, and they really quite don't know what the sequence is going to be. Same thing that once you've gone through all 5 players, you reshuffle these things, and the turn order can be entirely different the next time around as well. Now, of course, these Treachery cards play a really important part in it, and they could be played in a whole lot of different times during the game. You start off with a couple of these, and then there's ways throughout the battle that you can gain more, such as every new game turn you start a tally and check who's on top of the ladder and who's on the bottom of the ladder, and you get a distribution of cards depending on what your ranking is at that point. Highest on the ladder getting the least cards. There's also times during the sequence of the game where if you're the neutral guy, then you can roll a dice to grab another one of these things. And within the cards, it tells you when to play them. So there are various times throughout the game, all throughout. So now let me introduce you to some of the players. This is Mike. He is doing Warriors of Chaos, and he's fondling gently his Nurgle Demon Prince right there, the very feared Demon Prince. He was the guy that deployed first, and we'll show you the whole table layout in a little bit. That solemn fellow over there is Keith. He is representing the Lizardmen. I don't know why I got his photo here, but he deployed last, and he's tucked away in the corner. A couple of the other participants looking very relaxed. Over here on this side is David. There he is. And this young fellow over here, that's Jordan. David is doing High Elves. His army's off screen right now. And Jordan is doing the Empire, and they are situated right there. And then, of course, there's myself. Here I am looking a little bit distracted, getting the table set up. But in this game here, I am playing the Ratty Skavens. So here's how the table looks. I actually didn't take this right at deployment, but after the first turns have been had. So I guess to lay it out here again, this is Mike. He deployed first in the center, and then he chose for me to set up over here. That's my Skaven Horde. After that, I chose Jordan to go right there because I wanted a distraction for the Chaos guys and give him something to blast into early. So he laid out there. After that, David up there on the opposite side, he's with the High Elves. And then lastly, down here, is Keith with the Lizardmen, who has decided to oppose the Rats in some kind of old ancient grudge. This I took just because I was standing over top of it, and it was really the only good shot I got of any kind of deployment. I'm not going to talk about army list and what's in all this stuff because it really doesn't matter in a Triumph and Treachery game because all kinds of nonsense happens, and it's not about the strategy, it's about pushing models around. So, let's move on. This is actually after turn 1. So let me tell you what happened here as the lead up. Empire started it off by really not moving much of anything, as you'd expect. The Superstar Metal Wizard came through and blasted off the BSB with a mighty Searing Doom right out of the gates. And then he pounded this Demon Prince over here with a fair bit of shooting and managed to reduce it to 1 wound. The counter charge happened right away because Chaos took the next turn, and this Demon Prince rushed up over in approximately this area right here. There used to be some archers, but there no longer is. Also, there was a cannon on the edge of that hill, so the Demon Prince took care of those. These Marauders came crashing through and ruined that cannon, and then overran into various other things. Also, part of the counter charge was these Juggernauts coming through, and they actually helped this guy for whatever reason to crash through those archers and ended up into some knights. Now what I did in the next turn though is I came crashing in with my rat ogres into those marauders on the side. Now, here's a really interesting thing that happens in Triumph and Treachery, and that is because you've got to choose one enemy and one enemy only in each phase of the game. When it came to combat phase, and this marauder unit was both engaged with the steam tank and with me, because I chose for him to be my combat enemy, this steam tank, you'll notice, is buffered back, and that's how that happens. So in multi-combats, you can't have that, so that guy is effectively freed up, and the combat just comes between the two of us. Sadly, I'm rat ogres that miss a lot, and he had a little bit of regeneration buff on these fellas here, so I actually only killed 2 marauders, and that was a bit sad. At least elsewhere in the battlefield, I did get some success on that turn. This particular unit of Saurus right here was at one time full, and now you can see it's no longer. So that's the result of a big exciting turn of Skaven shooting. I think it was the first turn ever playing Skaven that I didn't have something blow up on me in turn 1, or at least misfire in some way, so it was pretty successful. And I took it out mostly on them, but I also took it out on some Empire Greatswords as well, and made their lives terrible. What did happen here that's pretty significant is, despite them getting depleted, these Saurus rushed into the tower where my Storm Vermin were holed up, and unsurprisingly beat the crap out of them, and they fled. Subsequently, they fled into a unit that was hiding behind here, which forced the general's unit to flee away as well, and it began pretty early that the Skaven running away was imminent, and it was going on. Now, moving on here to the elves in their first turn. Really not much action out of there. It's sort of laid out on the rest of the table that the 2 opponents had pitched each other and pitched into one another early. So knowing that, David knew that he could bide his time. So he just did a steady advance, worked a couple of buffs of magic, and prepared to cause treachery, which we'll get into in a short while here. So after everybody's had a turn, we're on to turn 2, and Chaos led the way into that one and crashed a little bit more action into the Empire. So what went on here is this Demon Prince here at the bottom clubbed that Hellblaster, but only overran like 2 inches, so didn't get into anything new. The Juggernauts were joined by the Chimera to beat up on these Knights, but actually the Empire guy was smart enough to get off a few buffs in there, and with the BSB hanging out here in the bottom, he did manage to hold in that combat, which was quite shocking. In other news, beyond that, the steam tank actually came in right after this. I don't have a picture of it, but the steam tank came crashing into that Demon Prince on the Empire turn and ruined him. So finished them off. Also, these fellas at the back, and you'll see them here in this next picture, they came up to help out the Knights against the Juggernauts. So the way that that combat worked out was the Knights finally succumbed to all that attacking, and they were eventually destroyed. But there was enough combat res from these fellas to force this Juggernaut up here to flee. And there was only one of them left there after another one got sucked into the swamp that he was standing in. So that was a big coup for the Empire. The Chimera went down to a little bit of fiery magic as well. And so it was really looking good for the Empire, soaking up that countercharge from the Chaos team earlier. A couple other things happened here because I kind of advanced quickly, and that is that the Doom Wheel had made its way across the table and smashed through a Chaos Chariot that it had advanced and was now facing the lines of these Swordmasters who had continued their advance as well. So here's another shot of what I was talking about here on the far side of the battlefield, but much the same here. I think the only thing of note that went on here was that the wizard here, tucked away with the White Lions, was casting a spell, and Jordan, the Empire player, helped him out by casting a treachery card called Sorceress Aid, where he irresistibly cast the spell, but also has a miscast, and the miscast cost him a few models out of that unit to sort of deplete it a little bit. Okay, over here with the Lizardman turn, this guy in fact is part of the Lizardman force. He used this as an ally and brought in a Dragon Mage from the High Elves. So they are swooping in and kind of enveloping things on this side of the battlefield. A couple other things to note is this Stegodon, who is right there, went and got the other part of the Chaos ally, which was an Empire cannon that was sitting on top of the hill, and mowed that down pretty easily. Moving on to this part here, another small bit of treachery happened here in that the High Elf saved himself from getting really devastated by all the shooting that had developed around here, simply because he played a card that refused this guy to use him as a shooting enemy for that phase. So he was facing 40 odd poison shots, well, probably more than that, and a flame template, and managed to escape that. Another quick thing of fun note over here is this gentleman who is packed in right there. That was another ally for the Chaos Force. He was an Empire Wizard. And what happens in Triumph and Treachery with mercenaries, if they ever flee, then there's a chance that when he rallies, another player can take control of him. And that actually happened for me. So I took control of that guy after he rallied, but his life was short-lived because there was a lot of poison shooting around there, and the Lizardman knocked him off, so I never got any bonus advantage from that. Now moving over to here, what I have happening is this is the result of a Warpfire Thrower that is depleting some Scrox units. So I was still struggling with what few things I had left at this point after much fleeing to kind of get something out of the Lizardmen, but they were really closing in on me. Over in another part of the battlefield, this is where the late game of the Empire, or sorry, not of the Empire, but of the Elves begins to rise. We have these Swordmasters who had charged into the Swordman unit of the Empire right there. These fellas had run down what was left of my Doom Wheel, and then there was this combat going on right here as that Jugger continued to flee between White Lions and the Chaos Warriors. As it turns out, those White Lions mopped up the Chaos Warriors, and with that, that was the last of the models that Chaos had, so at this point they are out of the game. Now, after doing a little bit of reforming, I should also note that the Swordmasters had at that point as well taken care of the remainder of the Empire that were behind those walls, so they are now gone and Empire's out of the game. So things are falling fast and furious. Something else that's very cool is this guy right here used to be a Skink Priest, and he turned himself into a Mountain Chimera, and we decided to use this cool Temple Guard Forge World model from ages ago that I had to represent it. And finally, without David having the "you can't shoot at me" action anymore, all the flame templates laid down and really cooked a lot of White Lions to deplete them to nearly nothing. And this is what they look like after that happens. This is a sad look at what my field looks like after the Lizardmen get through to me. If you remember earlier in the battle, these Saurus warriors had gone into the building and chased the storm vermin off, which kind of caused the chain reaction of everything else. So this, if you notice the swamp, is the very same photo that I took for my deployment, and it is now empty except for the Lizardmen that now occupy it. So that was the end of me. What happened the rest of the way is the Elves and the Lizardmen found themselves just kind of at odds with one another and did a little bit of posturing and moving around the table until the game finally ended after 5 turns. But the ultimate tally, after we counted it all up, was the Empire, through various bits of treachery and holding off on the Chaos countercharge, despite the fact that they were the first, or sorry, I guess the second ones out, they scored the most victory coins. So it was the Empire that was the winner in the end. Second to them, much due to these guys being able to maneuver around and mop up later in the game, brought the Lizardmen into a close second place. I think it was only 100 victory points difference, in fact. And despite my poor showing, the Doom Wheel rolled around and killed a lot of things, and Magic depleted some things, so I finished just behind Chaos for 4th place in this, and the Elves had just waited too late to spring their traps, so they finished last. So farewell from the little Skavens who ran away from the table, and I know this wasn't the most professional of battle reports, but I hope you guys have fun with this anyway and get a little bit of insight to try from Treachery. So farewell, and I'm looking forward to next month where Malorian will choose me a different army to face off against, and the excitement will ensue.